The district attorney called their alleged crime an American horror story. And today, a mother and her boyfriend had the first of many court appearances to come in connection with the killing of young Scott McMillan.
The district attorney described this case as nothing less than a real-life American horror story. A mother and her boyfriend stood accused of a crime so cruel it shook an entire community. It was the first of many court hearings, but the victims of their violence could never be heard again. That victim was 3-year-old Scotty McMillan. His murder didn't just shock Chester County, it sent waves of grief and anger across the nation. The courtroom wasn't filled with the accused that day. They didn't even appear in person. Instead, the room was filled with voices demanding justice. Among them was a note, written with shaky hands, the pencil pressing into paper like it carried the weight of the world. The heartbreaking part, the writer wasn't an adult. It was a child, a boy who had seen his little brother beaten, tortured, and taken from him forever. He was too young to fully understand death, but old enough to carry the scars of watching it happen. His younger brother Scotty used to follow him everywhere, always smiling, always clinging close. But inside that small Pennsylvania trailer, that joy was stolen. What happened there wasn't just abuse. It was planned. It was merciless. It was cruelty that no child should ever witness, let alone suffer. For 3 weeks, the torment went on. And then, silence. A silence that has lasted more than a decade. The people who should have protected Scotty didn't just fail him, they mocked him. They watched his pain. They ignored his cries. And when his tiny body finally went still on the floor, they didn't rush for help. They went shopping. They ordered pizza. They even went to sleep, as if nothing had happened. By the time they finally picked up the phone, they already knew the truth. Scotty was gone. The suspects are now locked away in Chester County Prison, kept in isolation because of how horrific their alleged crimes were. But the bigger question remains, how could this happen? How does a child suffer weeks of torture in modern America, with teachers noticing signs, with neighbors asking questions, and still no one stops it? How does a little boy vanish in plain sight while the world looks the other way? We're about to step into one of the darkest child abuse cases in recent memory. This isn't about dwelling on pain, but about uncovering how it happened, why no one stopped it, and what it will take to make sure it never happens again. Before we continue, a warning. This story contains disturbing details about child abuse. Some may find it upsetting. We share it with deep care and with respect for the victims whose voices can no longer be heard. To our subscribers, thank you. Because of you, this channel can continue shining light on cases that demand attention. Every like, comment, and share helps keep these stories alive. And if you're new here, welcome. We hope you'll join us, because awareness saves lives. And the story you're about to hear, it matters now more than ever. At a small district courthouse in Chester County, Pennsylvania, 2 people stood accused, Gary Lee Fellenbaum and his girlfriend, Jillian Tate. Instead of fighting the charges, they waived their first court hearings. The accusations against them were beyond comprehension. Prosecutors said Jillian's 3-year-old son, Scotty McMillan, had been tortured inside the trailer they all lived in. The details were unbearable. He was punched in the face and stomach, whipped with makeshift weapons, struck with a metal rod, tied to a chair, and beaten until his small body gave out. At one point, he was even hung upside down by his feet, his screams echoing inside the trailer. On November 4th, 2014, after days of this torment, Scotty died. But to understand the weight of this crime, we have to remember who Scotty was. Scott McMillan was born on January 26, 2011, in Chester County, Pennsylvania. From the very beginning, he brought light into the lives of those around him. He had bright red hair, piercing blue eyes, and a soft, curious spirit that made people feel at ease. Family and friends remember him as a little boy full of imagination. He loved trains, especially Thomas the Tank Engine. During car rides, he would hum or sing softly to himself, always in rhythm with the music on the radio. He liked to draw, to build small towns with his toy cars, and he rarely went anywhere without following his older brother, Ryan. Scotty didn't speak much, but he didn't need to. His love showed in the way he clung to the people he trusted, wrapping his tiny arms around them as if he never wanted to let go. Most of his young life was spent with his mother, Jillian, but the family was never stable. His father, Lauren McMillan, drifted in and out of the picture. Even though he shared 2 sons with Jillian, Scotty, and Ryan, their relationship was filled with fights, breakups, and long stretches of silence. Eventually, it ended for good. After the final split, Lauren moved to Overland Park, Kansas. From then on, he was barely present in his sons' lives. People close to the family said visits were rare, contact was minimal, and over time, he became little more than a name in Scotty's memory. Scotty was too young to understand the choices adults make. All he knew was that his father was gone, and life had shifted into something new. He adjusted in the only way a child can, quietly, without complaint, carrying the changes in silence. His mother, Jillian, stayed in Chester County. She was still young herself, balancing work and parenting, leaning on family whenever she needed help. 2 women stepped in to steady things: Aunt Kim, Jillian's sister, and Aunt Tara, the sister of Scotty's father, Lauren. Despite the distance and tension between the children's parents, both aunts loved the boys deeply. They filled in the gaps where they could. Aunt Kim, who lived nearby, was a constant presence. She was the one who picked Scotty up from the hospital after he was born. She took him places, gave him a safe space, and made sure he knew he was cared for. Aunt Tara lived farther away, but remained involved, visiting when she could, and checking in to keep the boys connected to their father's side of the family. For a time, this circle gave Scotty some stability. His childhood had bright moments: birthday parties, Halloween costumes, photos of him grinning with cake smeared across his face. These small memories seemed ordinary back then, but later they would feel like the calm before the storm. They would be revisited with painful questions. Were there warning signs hiding in plain sight? Could anything have been stopped? What's certain is this: Scotty wasn't born into isolation. He had people who loved him, who wanted him safe, and who tried to help. But the cracks in his family's foundation were already there. And in those cracks, something darker was waiting to enter. By October of 2014, Jillian made a decision that would change everything. She moved herself and her 2 sons, Ryan and Scotty, into a trailer in West Calm Township. The move wasn't random. Jillian had started a new relationship with a man she met at Walmart, a co-worker named Gary Fellenbaum. Gary was just 23 years old. To most people, he seemed quiet, distant, maybe even shy, but on the surface, he looked stable enough. Jillian either didn't know or didn't care to question that Gary was still legally married. His wife, Amber, and their infant daughter were living in that same trailer. Gary insisted that his marriage was over. He told Jillian they were only living under the same roof because Amber had nowhere else to go. Whether Jillian truly believed him or simply chose to look the other way, no one knows. What is clear is that she agreed to move in. The result was a crowded, unstable home. 2 women, 2 children, an infant, and a man caught between lies and resentment. The trailer was small, suffocating under the weight of stress and unspoken hostility. Court records later described the household as toxic, filled with tension, dysfunction, and silence. But no one left. No one reported the growing discomfort inside. Jillian's family, especially her sister Kim and the boys' Aunt Tara, began to notice changes. Jillian became distant. She stopped returning calls. Her once active presence on social media grew quiet. Something was shifting, and it didn't feel right. But without proof, their worries stayed unspoken. With Jillian holding full custody of her children, there was little anyone else could do beyond voicing their concern. Money pressures seemed to weigh heavily on her choices. For years, she had been raising 2 boys mostly on her own, with little to no help from their father. Moving in with someone who could share expenses may have felt like her only option, but that choice came with a cost that no one could have imagined. Almost as soon as she moved in with Gary, a chilling shift took place. Both Scotty and his older brother Ryan were pulled out of school. No notice was given, no paperwork was filed, no forwarding address was left behind. To the teachers at the Coatesville Area School District, the boys' sudden absence was alarming. At first, maybe it seemed ordinary. Perhaps the boys were sick or had transferred schools. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence grew. No one had heard anything. The school followed policy. A letter was mailed to the last known address. When no reply came, a staff member even visited the home. The door went unanswered. A note was left behind, and then nothing. No call was made to Child Protective Services, no attempt to reach neighbors, no second visit. The case sat in the system like just another truancy file, untouched and unresolved. What the school didn't know was that Jillian had already moved the boys weeks earlier. She had taken them to the trailer in West Calm Township, into the care of her new partner, Gary. And no one, not her friends, not her family, not the school, had been told where the children were living. With no forwarding records, no enrollment at another school, and no abuse report on file, the district treated it as a simple withdrawal. On paper, the case was closed. In reality, it was the first major silence in a chain of failures. 2 children had vanished from their classrooms, and the only system that noticed stopped looking after one unanswered knock. There was no follow-up, no escalation, no alert to social services. The file was left to gather dust, and with it the chance to intervene slipped away. Inside that silence, danger grew. Scotty and Ryan had disappeared, not just from school, but from the eyes of every adult who might have been able to help them. In the final 3 weeks of Scotty's life, what unfolded inside that trailer was not a sudden burst of anger. It wasn't a single moment of loss of control. Court testimony later revealed something far worse. It was patterned. It was deliberate. It was cruelty carried out day after day. The atmosphere inside the home grew darker with each passing week. Tensions between the adults ran high, and the children, especially Scotty, bore the weight of it. Expectations became stricter. Mistakes, no matter how small, were punished severely. There were no warnings, no gentle corrections, only escalating reactions. And every reaction was harsher than the last. One of the most disturbing patterns that later came out in court revolved around something as ordinary as breakfast. Scotty was only 3 years old, still too young to explain what he felt inside. Some mornings he simply wouldn't finish his food. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just stopped eating. To any reasonable adult, this would be a sign to ask questions. Was he sick? Was something wrong? But in that trailer, it wasn't treated as concern. It was treated as defiance. Every time Scotty hesitated at the table, it was taken as a personal challenge, and instead of kindness, he was met with punishment. According to court records, he was forced to sit for long stretches of time, told again and again to finish his meal. When that didn't work, the punishments grew harsher. Gary, in particular, escalated things. Scotty was tied to a chair using whatever household items were around, tape, straps, anything to keep him still. At times, he was shut away, kept separate from his brother, stripped of basic comfort, left alone as discipline. This wasn't a one-time event. It happened again and again. Every refusal at breakfast was seen as defiance. Every act of defiance was met with something worse. No one called a doctor. No one asked for help. No one reported it. What makes this period even more haunting is how many people were physically there and stayed silent. Gary's wife, Amber, later admitted that she had seen it happen. She told investigators she knew when Scotty was being isolated, when he was punished unfairly, when he was treated differently from his brother. But she did nothing. She said she was afraid of Gary, afraid of confrontation, afraid of what might happen if she spoke up. Whether her silence was truly fear or simply avoidance remains debated. But the result was the same. Scotty was left without anyone to protect him. For 3 weeks, no one picked up the phone to call the police. No one contacted the school. No one reached out to social services or even a doctor. Even as Scotty grew weaker, less talkative, more withdrawn, his small body showing visible signs of stress, the silence around him only deepened. Day after day, Scotty was kept apart from his brother. He was punished for the smallest things, locked in a cycle of control that grew harsher as time went on. This wasn't a moment of anger. It was a system, a pattern, carried out in plain sight of others who chose not to act. And then came November 4th, 2014. That morning, Scotty struggled to sit upright at the table for breakfast. His face, witnesses later said, was already swollen from the abuse of the night before. The day earlier, he had refused food. On this morning, he tried again, small bites, but his body wouldn't accept it. He spit the food back out. That simple act, a child struggling to eat, set off a chain of violence that would end his life. Gary Fellenbaum saw Scotty's hesitation at breakfast as disrespect. He became furious. Witnesses later described how he struck Scotty in the face, then the abdomen. The force sent the 3-year-old tumbling from his chair. But that wasn't the end. Instead of helping him up, Gary put him back in the chair. Then, using electrical tape, he bound Scotty tightly, keeping him restrained. Jillian later told investigators what happened next. Scotty squirmed, struggling to breathe, and still unable to eat. Gary struck him again. The blows caused Scotty to vomit. Moments later, he lost consciousness. Instead of calling 911, Jillian and Gary reportedly tried to revive him by putting him in a cold shower. They waited about 30 minutes, hoping he would wake. When he didn't, they moved him to a partially deflated air mattress on the floor. No blankets, no pillow, just the bare plastic. And then, unbelievably, they left. They went shopping. They ordered pizza. When they returned, Scotty was still motionless. Jillian didn't call for help immediately. She lay down to rest. She napped. It wasn't until around 7:30 p.m. that she checked on him again, still unresponsive. Only then was 911 called. Emergency responders arrived to a scene no one should ever see. Scotty showed no signs of life. His tiny body bore the marks of prolonged abuse, fresh injuries alongside older ones, bruises, abrasions, contusions. Every wound told a story of repeated harm. EMTs performed CPR and rushed him to the hospital. But it was too late. Scotty was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Investigators later said that even seasoned professionals had rarely seen a child in such a condition. The timeline, the silence, and the decisions made in that trailer defied understanding. Hours later, a nurse at the hospital made a call that would change everything. Shaken by what she had witnessed, she contacted law enforcement, not just to report the injuries, but to raise urgent concerns about how Scotty had ended up in that condition. According to her, the injuries weren't a single accident. They showed a repeated pattern of abuse. And the calm demeanor of the adults who brought him in didn't match the evidence before her eyes. Immediate action was needed. The call triggered a rapid response from Chester County detectives. Within hours, law enforcement arrived at the trailer on Hope Lane. What they found confirmed their worst fears. The home was in chaos. The trailer was cluttered, poorly maintained, and visibly unsafe. Makeshift items suggested neglect and improvisation. But the most horrifying reality? Scotty had never been alone. He had been surrounded by adults, 3 of them, and not one had called for help until it was far too late. Shortly after Scotty's death, District Attorney Tom Hogan held a press conference. His voice was calm, measured, but every word carried the weight of tragedy. This was not a single act of anger. This was a long, sustained pattern of abuse that was ignored. A child had died slowly, in plain sight, while adults who should have acted did nothing. Within hours, formal charges were filed. Gary Fellenbaum, 23 at the time, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, third-degree murder, multiple counts of aggravated assault, and endangering the welfare of a child. Investigators said his actions were central to what they described as a prolonged campaign of cruelty. Scotty's mother, Jillian Tate, was also arrested. She faced third-degree murder, criminal conspiracy, and child endangerment charges. Prosecutors emphasized that while she may not have delivered the most direct harm, she allowed it to happen. She stayed silent. She failed to protect her son. Even Amber Fellenbaum, Gary's wife, who also lived in the trailer, was charged with child endangerment. She hadn't directly harmed Scotty, but she had witnessed abuse, saw his suffering, and did nothing. Bail was denied for Gary and Jillian. Amber's bail was set at $500,000. None of the 3 appeared in person at that initial hearing. Instead, they were shown via closed-circuit TV from the county prison. The district attorney made it clear there were 2 aggravating factors in this case: Scotty's age, just 3 years old, and the torture he endured. For the DA's office, this was more than a legal proceeding. It was a statement. This wasn't about a single moment of wrongdoing. It was about a failure that had unfolded over days, in front of people who should have acted but chose not to. As the investigation progressed, authorities worked to piece together how this abuse happened, how it continued unnoticed, and how a child could vanish inside his own home, while 3 adults stood by. Court proceedings stretched over several years, shaped by complex charges, plea agreements, and a community searching for answers. Prosecutors relied on witness statements, forensic evidence, and testimony from people who had lived inside that home. The emotional weight of the case never lessened. In April 2017, Gillian Tate appeared before the court. She entered a guilty plea, admitting to third-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. As part of her plea deal, prosecutors dropped the possibility of the death penalty in exchange for her full cooperation. She would no longer have to testify against Gary, who would soon also accept responsibility. Gillian was sentenced to a minimum of 42 years in prison, with the potential to serve up to 94 years, depending on parole eligibility. In court, she expressed remorse, offering no excuses for her actions. Prosecutors acknowledged her cooperation, but emphasized that her failure to act had irreversibly changed Scotty's life. 5 months later, in September 2017, Gary Fellenbaum appeared in court. Facing overwhelming evidence, including statements from both Gillian and Amber, he chose to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty. His charges included first- and third-degree murder, conspiracy, and multiple counts of endangering the welfare of a child. The court handed down its final sentences. Gary Fellenbaum received life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed little emotion as the sentence was read. Amber Fellenbaum's case was handled separately. She pleaded guilty to child endangerment, admitting she saw signs of harm but failed to alert authorities. In 2017, she was sentenced to 6 to 16 years in prison, beginning her term shortly after Gary and Gillian's convictions. By early 2023, she had been released on parole. But the most powerful words during the hearings didn't come from a prosecutor, detective, or judge. They came from Ryan, Scotty's older brother. In therapy, Ryan had written a letter describing his time in that trailer. It was later read aloud in court. He spoke of fear, of feeling invisible, of watching what was happening and being unable to stop it. His words captured a childhood torn apart by grief, confusion, and betrayal. Even in a room full of adults, the voice of the survivor carried the strongest truth. Not all wounds leave visible marks. Some of the deepest damage lives quietly, carried by those left behind. After the trial, Ryan was placed in the care of his paternal aunt Tara and her husband, who later adopted him. The boy, who had endured 3 weeks of terror and loss, now had a home built for stability and healing. In the wake of Scotty's case, the community responded with donations, letters, and support to help Ryan rebuild his life. A trust fund was established in his name. On paper, it was generous, but in practice, the rules set for the fund caused frustration. The trust was designed for Ryan's future college education, not for immediate needs like therapy, medical care, or emotional support. Families who donated had assumed the money would help him recover now, not just save for the future. Ryan's adoptive guardians asked for changes to the trust to cover therapy and other essential care, but their requests were denied. The fund stayed locked for years, growing interest but remaining inaccessible to the child it was meant to help. Despite these challenges, Ryan received care from his guardians, extended family, and non-profit organizations. He started therapy, returned to school, and gradually began engaging with his new environment. At the state level, Scotty's case drew media attention, brief political commentary, and temporary calls for reform. But no sweeping policy changes were made. Children removed from school still weren't systematically tracked, and no new oversight laws passed. What did change, at least in the short term, was awareness. News reports, opinion pieces, and advocacy groups asked the difficult question: how can a child vanish from their classroom, disappear from records, and fall through every safety net? In that silence, Ryan had survived, but the cost was unimaginable. Should a child's healing really have to wait for college? Think about that. Drop your thoughts in the comments and share this video so voices like Ryan's aren't forgotten. Protecting children means acting when it matters, not years later. Scotty McMillan never appeared on a watch list. There were no flagged reports in state databases. No social worker ever stepped through the front door. By the time authorities arrived, the child they were meant to protect had already been failed. At the heart of this case is a haunting question. How can a young child vanish from school, home, and community oversight without triggering alarms? When Scotty and Ryan were suddenly pulled out of school, no one was told where they had gone. A letter was sent, one home visit was made, and that was it. Despite repeated absences, no formal report was filed with Child Welfare Services. No one escalated the concern. No red flags were raised high enough to demand intervention. There was no record of a single visit from the Department of Human Services. No follow-up, no inquiry. Mandatory reporting laws exist to give teachers, administrators, and medical professionals a duty to act when something seems off. But without clear evidence, no visible injuries, no confirmed allegations, many tread carefully. In Scotty's case, that caution became silence. Relatives later said they sensed something was wrong. Aunt Kim, who had cared for the boys before, noticed Jillian distancing herself. Aunt Tara remembered long gaps without contact. But under state law, family had no legal power to intervene unless abuse had already been confirmed. Suspicion alone wasn't enough. There was no system linking school withdrawal to social services. No policy triggered automatic welfare checks when children disappeared without explanation. That gap allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. Adults around Scotty, neighbors, teachers, even family, weren't uncaring. They were unarmed, without the authority or tools to act. The cost of that institutional silence was permanent. This wasn't just neglect. It was systemic failure, a series of overlooked signs stretching across multiple agencies and individuals. Everyone did a part of their job, but no one connected the pieces. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it grows quietly, hidden behind routine explanations and misplaced trust. Child abuse isn't always visible. That's why vigilance and shared responsibility matter. Scotty's story is heartbreaking, and it was preventable. There were no locked doors. He wasn't hidden in a remote location. He lived in a home surrounded by adults, yet no one intervened in time. That should make every one of us stop and ask, why? If a child disappears from school, it matters. If someone starts withdrawing from relatives, it matters. If a caregiver seems evasive, that matters too. These aren't small things. They're early warning signs that can save a life if we notice and act. You don't need all the facts to ask a question. You don't need permission to speak up. Scotty didn't get a second chance, but other children can. Share this video, speak up, subscribe, because the next child in danger may be counting on someone like you to notice.